So let's take up one more topic. And yeah, this will be the last topic for the day, I think. In your curriculum, if you're paying attention to it, you'll note that our labs are different. I did want to make sure I pointed you at the lab download if you're looking for extra work to do, which I know you all are going back to your hotel room and writing more Python code here. Yeah, at simeonfranklin.com/pythonlabs.zip, there are files that contain the labs that are in your curriculum. And we're mostly covering the same topics. I'm trying to rewrite the labs in cohesive fashion, so we're kind of tackling the same task and gradually adding features to it, instead of each lab being completely independent, which fits how I learn better anyways. We're skipping section 12, which is regular expressions. My justification for skipping regular expressions are the Python implementation of regular expressions are pretty simple, but regular expressions themselves are complicated. So if you already know regular expressions, it'll be easy to pick up the Python implementation. And if you don't know regular expressions, we don't have enough time in the class to teach you what they are so that you can then learn to use them. But suffice it to say, it's a language with it's a mini language with a syntax for doing pattern matching on text in sophisticated, complicated ways. And if you do shell scripting or Perl scripting or something, you're probably pretty fluent in regular expressions already. And Python has I believe it's PCRE compliant regex library. So it's just like Perl regexes more or less and can do all the same sort of stuff, if not quite as fluently, since it's at library level instead of syntactic level. So skipping the RE section, which is section 12, we'll talk about doctests. Yeah, let's talk about doctest next. On the resources page that I have up, I have an overview of doctests. It's just a link to the Python standard lib documentation, and it describes doctests. It's worth reading through to see all the various complexities of doctests, but I can describe them very simply and run you through some examples. And then I'd like you to add some doctests to your classmates' file, even some simple ones, and be able to run them. So the idea with doctests are we can embed sample console sessions in the doc strings for our program and its functions. And we can append the required output from the console session below the sample console session. And the doctest module will run our code, grab our doctests, look for anything that's formatted like a console session, and execute it against our code. So this all sounds really complicated, but it's actually super simple. And let me demonstrate. Let's write a function that takes a list and returns a CSV string with a new line. And you all have just written this line of code, hopefully. So this should look pretty familiar too. So function, you pass it any arbitrary length of sequence. It joins by a comma and appends a new line. Let's find my console here. And hey, it works. We can tell that there is a new line in the string that's returned because there's an additional new line outputted by the print. So we've got a blank line. And how do we normally tell that our stuff works? Well, we just run it, and if it looks like we're getting the right output, then hey, it must work. But we haven't really tested it. And if we go in and change, we need to remember to rerun it and look at the output and hopefully not miss anything to verify that it still works. So let's put in some tests, and let's make the tests also be somewhat useful documentation. Doctests start with that 3 arrows thing. And they're just getting that from the standard Python console, right? You notice there's 3 arrows off to the side. That's the start of every line. So it's a console session. I'm calling a function, format line, and I expect to get back abc/n. OK, now I can run my tests in a couple of ways. I can import the doctest module, pass the doctest module the name of the module that I want to test. I could switch my if name equals main here, again, to import the doctest module and run it on myself. But one shortcut frequently used is to use the -m switch of the Python executable. -m lets you specify a module that should be started. So I'm running my Python file, but I'm running it with, in some way, the doctest module. And the doctest module complains and says, line 6 of the doc string for scripting.format line has inconsistent leading white space. And I can see that it does. I've got 1 space before. OK. Oh, line 6 of the doc string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it doesn't like the inconsistent leading white space there. There's inconsistent leading white space, and it has a single quote. What did I format wrong? Let's make this deliberately wrong to start with. There we go. OK. So back here, fixing my formatting failures. I've made it deliberately wrong. I took off the new line at the end. And I also took off my quotes. My double quotes were throwing it off. And when I now run python-m doctest on my scripting file, it says, failed example. You called format line with ABC as a sequence. You expected to get back A, B, C. And instead, you got back single quote, A, B, C, new line, ending single quote. Well, that's actually the format that I want. So I'm going to adjust my test to be the proper format. I'm trying to adjust my test to be the proper format. And it still doesn't like my leading new line. Why not? Okay, let me read the doc test example myself. Get rid of all the leading new line nonsense. That fixed my leading white space problem. And just noting here, the doc string does have to be indented. The function body has to be indented. It's like if I unindented the first line of my doc string, this would be a syntax error. It expects an indented block. But once I'm inside of my triply quoted string, I can do whatever, including starting at the beginning of the line if I want to, which I am because for some reason my initial tabs or spaces are throwing it off. And now it wants... It's literally putting in the new line. There we go. As with many Unix tools, silence is golden. So the fact that it just said nothing means that I was successful. But that kind of bugs me. So I'm going to use the -v switch, which makes it verbose in output. And it says, OK, I'm trying a test. Format line, pass it this. I'm expecting to get back abc/n. And what I had to remember to do is literally put the string /n, which means I escaped my new line, or I escaped my backslash twice. That's correct. One items had no test. What had no test? What things can have a doc test? Or a doc string, rather. I've got one up at the top, right? Your whole file can have a doc string, as well as each function. And the doc string for the whole file didn't have a test. One item passed all tests, which was scripting.formatLine. It specifies the function. One test in 2 items, 1 passed, 0 failed, test passed. Lots of verbose output to tell me it ran all the tests successfully and they all passed. It's extremely common to look at people's Python source code. And I wish, by the way, that my formatting would work. There we go. Yay, because that looks a lot cleaner. It's extremely common to read people's Python source code and see tests like this in the documentation because it's actually helpful to know what the function does by looking at the sample output. The doctest module adds for you the ability to make sure that your documentation stays in sync with your code. So one killer thing in comments and why some people don't comment extensively is comment rot. You leave a lengthy comment describing how your function works. Later on, you have to change it under time pressure, and you change the implementation and maybe the results, but you don't change your comment. The only thing worse than code that isn't commented is code that is incorrectly commented. Doc strings let you at least run and check and see that your tests still work. And if your tests still work, then probably your documentation is not too off. So you can think about it as tests for your documentation as much as tests for your implementation. Yes, it is. We are embedding tests in our comments. And obviously, this would get onerous if you had to do like 10 lines of stuff to set up your test and then run your test. Now your documentation is like really long, longer than is helpful. So there's another library for using extensive tests, especially ones that require setup. But for short utility functions and short tests that also serve as documentation, doctest is great. So if you're like me, you're probably going to have all sorts of I don't recognize your format thing. The main thing I usually do with doctests is forget the leading space and do this, and then it complains. Not a valid doctest. But I would like you to add a doctest to your classmate's file and have it successfully pass. And it can be something simple like this. It's just a utility line that does something like output. It could be something more complicated like your CSV function that reads from a CSV file. And in that case, you might supply a test CSV file that does not change with your CSV function. Call your CSV function with your test file name and check and make sure that the data structure that you load is the data structure that you expected. So it's also common if you're running extensive tests to have testing data that goes along with it. But it's your choice. And to review briefly, while there's other ways of running doctests, and the Python documentation itself suggests this method, define a function that imports doctests and call the test mod, which tests the current module. And then if your name equals main, call your testing function. I'm happy to just do python-m doctest and not add any doctest running stuff to my script. Yeah, so I'm done with the official lecture portion. We're to like 4 o'clock, but I am here till 5 to hang out if people are continuing to work on labs. I'll circulate, and you can always kick me around and say, don't bother me, and I'll go read my email or something. So, all right, see you tomorrow.